human impact on our environment, on the world, globally. So this video is about what would happen if every human suddenly disappeared. We see how the earth would change with us gone. And then we'll talk about, what we do and the impact we have on earth right now. But I really like this video. It's super fun.
Human beings are everywhere. With settlements on every continent, we can be found in the most isolated corners of Earth's jungles, oceans, and tundras. Our impact is so profound, most scientists believe humanity has left a permanent mark on Earth's geological record. So what would happen if suddenly every human on Earth disappeared? With no one maintaining them, some of our creations backfire immediately. Hours after we disappear, oil refineries malfunction, producing month-long blazes at plants like the ones in Western India, the Southern United States, and South Korea. In underground rail systems like those in London, Moscow, and New York City, hundreds of drainage pumps are abandoned, flooding the tunnels in just 3 days. By the end of the first week, most emergency generators have shut down, and once the fires have gone out, the Earth goes dark for the first time in centuries. After the first catastrophic month, changes come more gradually. Within 20 years, sidewalks have been torn apart by weeds and tree roots. Around this time, flooded tunnels erode the streets above into urban rivers. In temperate climates, the cycle of seasons freezes and thaws these waterways, cracking pavement and concrete foundations. Leaking pipes cause the same reaction in concrete buildings, and within 200 winters, most skyscrapers buckle and tumble down. In cities built in river deltas like Houston, these buildings eventually wash away completely, filling nearby tributaries with crushed concrete. Rural and suburban areas decay more slowly, but in largely unsurprising ways. Leaks, mold, bug, and rodent infestations, all the usual enemies of the homeowner, now go uncontested. Within 75 years, most houses supporting beams have rotted and sagged, and the resulting collapsed heap is now home to local rodents and lizards. But in this post-human world, local has a new meaning. Our cities are full of imported plants, which now run wild across their adopted homes. Water hyacinth coat the waterways of Shanghai in a thick green carpet. Poisonous giant hogweeds overgrow the banks of London's Thames River. Chinese ailanthus trees burst through New York City streets, and as sunken skyscrapers add crumbled concrete to the new forest floor, the soil acidity plummets, potentially allowing new plant life to thrive. This post-human biodiversity extends into the animal kingdom as well. Animals follow the unchecked spread of native and non-native plants, venturing into new habitats with the help of our leftover bridges. In general, our infrastructure saves some animals and dooms others. Cockroaches continue to thrive in their native tropical habitats, but without our heating systems, their urban cousins likely freeze and die out in just 2 winters. And most domesticated animals are unable to survive without us, save for a handful of resourceful pigs, dogs, and feral house cats. Conversely, the reduced light pollution saves over 1 billion birds each year, whose migrations were disrupted by blinking communication tower lights and high-tension wires. And mosquitoes multiply endlessly in one of their favorite man-made nurseries, rubber tires, which last for almost 1,000 years. As fauna and flora flourish, Earth's climate slowly recovers from millennia of human impact. Within 35,000 years, the plant cycle removes the last traces of lead left by the Industrial Revolution from Earth's soil, and it may take up to 65,000 years beyond that for CO2 to return to pre-human levels. But even after several million years, humanity's legacy lives on. Carved in unyielding granite, America's Mount Rushmore survives for 7.2 million years. The chemical composition of our bronze sculptures keeps them recognizable for over 10 million. And buried deep underground, the remnants of cities built on floodplains have been preserved in time as a kind of techno-fossil. Eventually, these traces too will be wiped from the planet's surface. Humanity hasn't always been here, and we won't be here forever. But by investigating the world without us, perhaps we can learn more about the world we live in now. If you're looking for a page-turning tour of a post-human Earth, we highly recommend The World.
I really enjoy that video because it shows you just how quickly, in the grand scheme of things, we return to normal. Did you have a question?
Well, now we know how zombie apocalypses will look like now.
True, except zombie apocalypses are not biologically a sound idea, because once the brain goes dead, it can't function to reanimate dead tissue. That's not plausible. So, sad to say, your zombie apocalypse cannot actually happen. Anyway, we're going to start off talking about human impacts by looking at something called an ecological footprint. Now, an ecological footprint is something that each one of us has. It is a measure of how much land is needed to sustain us and our lifestyle and our food habits and our clothing and how we get from place to place. There is an actual number of acres or hectares, depending on where you are and how it's being measured, that tells you this is the amount of land exactly that's required to keep you alive every single year. There are a number of things that we consider when we look at this. So the first is carbon. This is the carbon footprint you hear about so much. It represents the amount of forest land that could sequester carbon dioxide emissions from the burning fossil fuels, excluding the fraction absorbed by the oceans, which leads to acidification. What does that mean, sequester carbon dioxide? You know how plants perform photosynthesis? Well, they pull that carbon dioxide used for photosynthesis from the atmosphere. This is a measure of how much land would be needed to perform the amount of photosynthesis it takes to remove the carbon dioxide that you create from the atmosphere. Like based off of how much you drive and how you breathe and the types of transportation that you use and the type of energy that's used at your home. Is it gas or is it electricity? All of that is considered together in your carbon footprint. And then there's cropland that we consider. It represents the amount of cropland used to grow crops for food and fiber for human consumption, as well as for animal feed, oil crops, and rubber. That is the rubber that makes the tires in the vehicles that you ride. That is the cotton that gets grown to make your shirt that you're wearing. Grazing land represents the amount of land that is used to graze livestock for meat, dairy, hide, and wool products. So not just how much land did it take for us to sustain the growth of the cow that you ate in a burger until it was slaughtered, but also how much land was used to sustain the dairy cows that produce your milk and cheese and butter. How much was used to sustain the cows that are slaughtered and used to make leather goods. All of that contributes to your ecological footprint. Forest represents the amount of forest required to supply timber products, pulp, and fuel wood. So fuel wood for your fireplace. If you look around your house, there's wood all over the place, wooden furniture, wooden cabinets, wood that was broken down and turned into paper to make the books in your house. Built up land represents the amount of land covered by human infrastructure, including transportation, housing, industrial structures, and reservoirs for hydropower. This is going to include sidewalks, roads, bridges, school buildings, houses, apartment complexes, skyscrapers, all of the buildings, anywhere that we have built something that covers up land. And fishing grounds, calculated from the estimated primary production required to support the fish and seafood caught based on catch data for marine and freshwater species. That's an estimation of how much water is used to keep the fish that we fish for alive. Basically, the ecological footprint measures how fast we consume resources and generate waste compared to how fast nature can absorb our waste and generate new resources. So are we using Earth's resources faster than Earth can replenish them? And most of the time, the answer is yes. We try to find a balance in our ecological footprint between using the resources that Earth provides us and allowing it to replenish that. Currently, we're depleting the Earth. So you can see a chart here that shows the ecological footprint of countries in 2013. And this is measured in hectares, which is basically like 2.5 acres. So if it's 7.5, let's say 8 hectares that we use on average in the United States, that would mean about 12 acres, right? 12 acres is what you and I and most other Americans need annually to support our lives. You can see that there are some countries over here that don't use anywhere near that, like India, Colombia, Brazil, South Africa, China, Argentina, and then you get more and more as these countries become a little bit wealthier. But in India, let's say that they use about 1 hectare, that's 2.5 acres. Now we can picture acres because that's what we measure things in here, right? The world average ecological footprint in 2012, almost 10 years ago, was 2.84 hectares per person. So that comes out to what, like 6 acres-ish, 5 acres-ish per person. That's the average. The capacity, how many acres can support the total number of people, is 1.73 hectares per person. That's like about 3 acres per person. We currently do not have enough land to sustain the consumption that we are doing every year. We are using more land than is available. What does that mean? It means that we're going to run out of land that actually is worth anything. We're going to deplete it. We're going to use up the resources to a point where it's not going to be restored within our lifetime. This is what I'm talking about. So the Earth's surface is about 28% land, 72% water. We know that, mostly water. Of the land, of the total land that's available, only 19% of the surface of the Earth is actually useful to us. So that 19% of the Earth has to sustain all nearly 8 billion of us. But as we use that land, more and more is being depleted. That means we're taking land away from ourselves every year. Land that we can't get back, that we can't restore. We're also losing productive waters. That's rivers, lakes, streams, and even the ocean. So as we get older, as our lives go on, the amount of land and the amount of water that's available to sustain our entire global population of humans is going to continue to decrease while our population is going to continue to increase. So we are heading towards a very risky, dangerous situation where there's not going to be anywhere near enough resources for us to survive as a global population of humans. Is that going to affect us here in the United States? Probably not as much as it's going to affect people in places like India, but it still will have an effect here, especially economically. And we can organize the ways that we negatively impact the environment into this acronym called HIPPCO. So this summarizes the major activities that humans participate in that contribute to mass levels of extinction. HIPPCO stands for habitat loss, invasive species, population overgrowth, pollution, climate change, and overharvesting. And I'll go through each one of those on its own slide. First is habitat loss. When the natural habitat is damaged or destroyed to such an extent that it is no longer capable of supporting the species. This is an image of the Amazon rainforest. And all of this land in here has been cleared. So not very long ago, there were millions of animals, millions of plants that were living in this area. That area has been cleared. It's not useful to them anymore. Those plants clearly died when they cut them down. The animals, some of them died in that process. Some of them are going to die in the process of moving to a new place. Some of them are going to get to a new place where they don't have enough resources and they're going to die there. While some will successfully survive in their new locations. Either way, that is millions of animals and plants that are going to die because of this habitat loss, because there's not enough resources for them anymore. Invasive species. These are organisms that we introduce to an environment where they don't normally come from. And when we do that, these organisms can harm their new ecosystems. One of the biggest ways that they can harm them is by overpopulating very quickly. What keeps populations at normal levels that are sustainable by an ecosystem are predators. Think about if there were no predators hunting zebras. So zebras are out there in the African savanna, but lions aren't hunting them, hyenas aren't hunting them, cheetahs aren't hunting them, crocodiles aren't hunting them. All of the zebras that get killed off every year, now they live. They're going to boom in population. It's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. Now that doesn't happen there because they have predators. So when you take an organism from somewhere that it has predators and put it somewhere that it doesn't have predators, the population won't be controlled. It's going to keep booming and booming. Usually, these organisms are also really good at outcompeting other species in the same area for resources. So they basically bully the existing species into declining populations. And these guys take over and just roam. Pollution, this is one that we all are fairly familiar with. It's when something is introduced into the environment that is dirty, unclean, or has a harmful effect. Oil spills like the Deepwater Horizon from British Petroleum take years to recover from and kill catastrophic levels of marine life. That was hard for me to say right now. Yes, we remember all of the little commercials where they were washing the ducks off with Dawn soap, but that does not solve the problem of all of the oil spilled in the ocean. That doesn't save all of the fish that died. It doesn't restore the plant life that was killed. That's going to take probably hundreds of years for it to go back to the way it was, if it has that opportunity. We've all seen images of those trash islands out in the middle of the ocean. That's water that can't be used by those animals and those plants out there. That's tainting their habitat. It's causing them harm. It's killing organisms there. Population overgrowth is when there are too many organisms of a species in a certain habitat. This is a problem in many places all over the world. So something that happens as countries start to become more economically stable, more jobs are available, more resources are available, populations grow really big, really fast. And when that happens, there's a shortage of supplies, of housing, of food, of clothes, of the resources that we need to survive. And so to catch up, we continue to overharvest, we continue to take more from the environment to sustain us people, and we harm the environment in the process. It's a lose-lose situation, basically. Climate change is a change in temperature, precipitation, or wind patterns around the world. This is over an extended period of time. So climate is patterns of weather over long periods, where weather is what's happening in the sky right now, today, right here. This is the most threatening issue that we're going to face in the next century. The average temperature has risen 1.4 degrees in the last 100 years. Why is that significant? You know, the only difference between now and the Ice Age was like 10 degrees, right? Globally, 10 degrees. Scientists think that over the next 50 to 100 years, there's going to be another 4-degree increase. Think about that for a second. Over the course of 200 years, the Earth is going to warm about half as much as it took for us to come out of the last Ice Age. That is going to cause massive problems. All of those places that stay frozen year-round, warming up at least even 1 degree causes major problems with glaciers melting, habitats being lost that way. Climate change doesn't just affect land, but the oceans as well. Tons of coral reefs are dying from acidification of the ocean. It's causing something called coral bleaching. These 3 pictures were taken over the course of 9 months. So in the time that it takes for someone to have a baby, this entire coral reef died. Here it was healthy in December of 2014. It was dying, it was bleaching in February of 2015, that's just 3 months later. And it was dead by August. This is happening all over the world. You can see people recording videos showing you over time how these coral reefs are dying all over the planet. And overharvesting. When populations are harvested at a rate that is unsustainable, if you're a hunter or a fisher, then you know the term harvesting means hunting or killing. We don't use the word killing typically when we talk about hunting because we're harvesting. We're taking organisms from the population that exists to maintain a normal level. Now, places like Texas are really good about not over-harvesting, right? If you have a hunting license, you're allowed to take so many of each type of species. But that's not necessarily easy to enforce all over the world, and not everybody has those kinds of restrictions. So we can go into the ocean and we can just fish and fish and fish and fish and take more fish from the ocean in one day than are able to replenish themselves by next year when we go fishing again. Overharvesting has been a problem for a very long time, and only in the recent decades have we tried to do anything about it. Overharvesting was a problem with elephants in Africa. For a while, people didn't monitor who was hunting elephants and why they were doing it. And so tourists would go in and they would just kill elephants in these bottle hunts. And they would take their tusks, and poachers would take their tusks, and it dwindled the population of elephants down to an endangered level. This happens all over the place, all over the world, especially with big game animals or with big top predators that people just think it'd be really cool to have a picture of standing next to them with a gun. We don't just do this with animals, we do this with plants too. We overharvest in our forests to accommodate all of the wood that's being used to make our paper and our homes and our furniture. That, while it is sad and depressing, is HIPPCO, how we as humans impact the world around us.